Okay, so it was last night. It was 11 p.m. and my teeth were slowly getting cleaned. And I thought, I've got to give a talk tomorrow morning about the University of Oxford's MPLS Graduate Recruitment Day. Yeah. So would you like to hear a presentation about that? Okay, right. That's fine. I'll just read some of my own work instead. It's fine. So this is considerably more nerve-wracking. This is one I wrote for issue 10 of 5 out of 10. So the issue was called Heart, and it was one of the most stressful things I've ever had to do in terms of drawing that Tetris heart at about 10 p.m. It was not very fun, but I thought that this was a good piece to read out because I know a lot of people here are obviously here because they love video games, but know quite a lot of my friends, and I've had personal experiences with mental health issues, and this piece is all about using games to cope with those things. So hopefully you enjoy it. If you don't, please don't boo. This is a wee bit scary. So this piece is called Get Well, and all the photos in this were taken by me. So there you go. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that nice? This summer, I visited Canada for a fortnight. It had been a difficult few months, and I was grateful to get away from Britain for a while. So I walked down the beautiful boulevards of Vieux-Montreal, explored the galleries and museums of Toronto, felt the spray of Niagara Falls against my cheap plastic poncho, and I got really drunk with several contributors to my magazine. While in Toronto, our new managing editor had lots of great ideas for activities. She reiterated one quite a lot. We have to go to Get Well, Caitlin insisted. Like most dive bars in Toronto, Get Well was dark and filled with a tantalizing selection of microbrews. But the main draw wasn't the devastating 9% ABV stout or the delicious wheat beer. It was a selection of old arcade machines at the back. Isolated from the glowing allure of Galaga and Operation Wolf was one of my all-time favourites. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, yay! Now I was old enough to properly reach the controls because I last played this in a machine when I was 8 years old in an amusement arcade thousands of miles away from here. And I was with Caitlin and her friends Kelsey and Jake, and I fought against Shredder's Legion of robot soldiers one last time. We battled through the Technodrome with a beer in one hand and a joystick in the other. Or actually, it was a joystick and beer in the left hand and buttons on the right. Every line drawn on a cathode ray tube, every low-fidelity shout of "Cowabunga" evoked nostalgia. The bar lived up to its name, and I felt a little better. Video games, especially the old classics of youth, are my therapy of choice. They're a great way to recuperate from a cold or hangover, and they're an even better way to combat sadness. Games like Bayonetta and Rock Band can bring me out of any slump, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the best for it. I love the comfort of racing through the zones, knowing every secret passage and shortcut, the sights, the sounds, the speed. It's the utter lack of anything new or surprising that makes it so enjoyable. It's a cup of tea and a couple of slices of game toast. Sonic 3 is set on the floating island. It's guarded by Knuckles the Echidna, and his peaceful existence is shattered when the Death Egg space station crashes into the island following the events of Sonic 2, and he's duped by Dr. Robotnik into opposing Sonic while Robotnik steals the Master Emerald from right under Knuckles' snout. And I think looking back, reading this again, that was not going to be an easy sentence to write. Throughout the game, Knuckles is fighting to preserve something in a misguided way. And sometimes as I play through this 20-year-old game for the 100th time, I wonder, am I doing the same thing here? Is escaping from sadness by running through a well-worn fantasy a good coping mechanism, or is it just a temporary distraction? It's hard to separate anecdote from data when it comes to video games and mental health issues. Some studies suggest they're beneficial, while others indicate that playing violent video games is associated with increased depressive symptoms. In the original piece, I linked a couple of studies, but in the absence of hard data, I decided to instead defer to anecdata. So this is not a literature review, it's really just a tribute to the games that get me through tough times. So I spent my childhood summers in Portrush, a town on Northern Ireland's northeastern Causeway coast. My family had a static caravan there, and the odd weekend trip aside, I usually had 2 solid weeks there in the summer. It's a beautiful place. You get the untamed natural basalt columns of the Giant's Causeway, the barely tamed Carrick-a-Reed rope bridge, the towering limestone cliffs of White Rocks, and the miles of golden beaches at Portrush Strand. At the latter, we would shelter from bracing winds inside the car with fish and chips, watching the sunset as the tide came in. It's my favourite place in the world. If we were really lucky, we would go to Barry's. It is Ireland's largest amusement park. And like most largest things in Ireland, it is unimpressive to anyone visiting from any other country in the world. But for my younger self, it was magical. Roller coasters, ghost trains, and this terrifying flying saucer thing called a satellite that I never really had the courage to ride. My 3 brothers and I would race in the junior dodgems. Every year I grew older each time, and the bumper cars would move a bit slower as I weighed them down more until I graduated to the adult cars. Of course, for someone who loved video games and consumed all of the media I could get my hands on, I was even more excited about the arcade machines. Barry's had many classics like Turtle, Street Fighter 2, Scud Race, Star Wars Trilogy, but the centerpiece is this really obscure racer from 1989 called Power Drift. Anybody play Power Drift? Oh yes, one person, yeah. So, Yu Suzuki's Power Drift is a fusion of roller coaster and racing games in a hydraulic cabinet that looks more like a spaceship. The tracks weave and warp as you tear them apart, the cabinet tilting and violently shuddering as you drive over log bridges, and you quite often fall off them. It's a game from 1988, and it relies on sprites rather than polygons, throwing pixels at your eyes like a tornado tearing through an art studio. Arcades allow for thank you. Arcades allow for game experiences that are difficult to translate to the home. Sega's cabinets had technological horsepower way beyond consoles at the time, but even an emulated version of Power Drift doesn't do justice to the imposing deluxe cabinet. You can actually see it tilting here as you go around the corners, and that cabinet would move as you turned. It was great. It was really good. I had to be lifted into the cabinet just to play, and I felt like I was sneaking onto a roller coaster by standing on my tiptoes. Arcade games are often fleeting, especially when your feet can barely reach the pedals, but the memories can last a lifetime. You get 3 minutes of fun, 3 minutes of escape without any responsibilities or a thought to the future. Things aren't so easy now. It's hard to play Power Drift for starters, but I do keep the soundtrack on my phone for emergencies. Video games and breakups go hand in hand. I'm sure they've ruined many of my relationships, but they're also great therapy after the event. Some like to watch cheesy movies and stuff themselves with ice cream, but I like to get drunk and play racing games. Forza Motorsport 3 got me through a bad breakup a couple of years ago, or maybe it was Elvis Costello and Jackson Browne playing in the background. But for a quick fix, I always come back to 2004's Burnout 3. Yeah, I found myself single again in January, reaching for a beer and an old CD wallet full of Xbox games. This might actually be a really tragic piece a year from now if I become an alcoholic. But anyway, thanks to the miracles of backwards compatibility, I was racing and crashing once again. So by all rights, Burnout 3 should be a frustrating game. You're constantly smashing into your opponents, the traffic, or through a fence and into a vineyard. Surprisingly, for a game made in Britain, it's got an obnoxious American commentator that you'll want to mute as soon as you've loaded the game. But, yeah! But rather than being frustrating, instead, it's cathartic and comforting at the same time. Breaking up with someone is upsetting because of the change, whether it was unexpected or it was just a matter of time. You built a life around that person, and to have that suddenly uprooted is distressing. You hate them, you love them, you want them back, you wish you'd never known them. And in that maelstream of emotions, all you want is something reliable, an old friend you neglected, an old place of solace, an old game of which you know every corner. Whenever I play Burnout, I know exactly where I am. Even crashing your car keeps you in a position of control. Time slows down an impact, and you can steer your burning wreck with aftertouch, drifting into a rival and snatching an exploding victory from the jaws of defeat. Burnout Revenge went one step further by letting players launch traffic at each other like hockey pucks. But Burnout 3 is the zenith of risk and reward racing that encourages constant acts of precision recklessness. You quickly find yourself in that mythical zone where it's just you and the game in a place where emotions dare not tread. It's a sublime game, perhaps even a perfect one, but more importantly, it's a comforting space and a happy place. Did anybody see my VideoBrains talk at Christmas? Okay, just pretend you didn't. Because it kind of flows into this, and I wrote this piece, and then I gave that talk a couple of months later, so this is kind of a weird, 0.9 beta version of it. Christmas is a time of mixed emotions for me. It used to be a time that brought my family together, but now it serves as a reminder of how divided we have become. Thankfully, Christmas nights never changes. A portal to the past covered in fairy lights and tinsel. I used to play it every year, wiping my save games and starting over so I could reopen the presents awarded after completing a stage. You can mix up the game's music, check out your collection of friendly Nighttopians, and even play as Sonic the Hedgehog. What more could you want? I once described Christmas nights as the ghost of Christmas past. It's a season as it was, traditionally decorated and celebratory. In the magic created by nights, it's easy to believe that Santa Claus really does exist, and you better go to sleep or he won't bring you anything. To be reminded of older, simpler, and perhaps better times in this way is a mood booster in and of itself. But to understand why it's such a powerful, uplifting game, We need to look at Nights as a whole, not just its festive limited edition. Nights takes place in a world of dreams. The eponymous purple jester appears to the protagonists, Clarice and Elliot, in their dreams, helping them to defeat their nightmares. But unlike Sonic and Mario, Nights doesn't have the power to vanquish evil by itself. Clarice and Elliot had the power of courage all along. Isn't that a nice moral? Yeah, that's really good. So many things about Nights are wonderful. The music, the vibrancy, the freedom of flight, the happy little Nightopians that bounce around the world. But it really speaks to a fundamental tenet of video games, which is the line written on the box. In a dream, we can do anything we want to. The lyrics to the ending song says. Nights perfectly encapsulates that distinctly Sega blue sky thinking. The games don't need to be a gritty facsimile of reality, or even an explicit escape from it. They can be brighter, they can be happier, and almost utopian, and it's a particularly optimistic brand of escapism. So I played Sonic 3 again the other week, and it had been about a year or so, and I guess I was just saving it up for a special occasion. I went back to the floating island, I raced around every loop, I collected every Chaos Emerald, and I defeated Dr. Robotnik once more. The story never changes, and the reason why you're replaying the story doesn't change much either. Was this really helping? Was I merely coping by putting things off for another day? I can't answer that, but as Sonic watched the ruins of the Death Egg disintegrate, I knew that I would get well in time. Thanks.